All right, Snow's still missing in action.
I hope she's
The
having a
date
wonderful time.
must be going really good.
Yes.
So
We're happy for her.
So we got Wing It. So we have Josh Noble. We wanted to talk more about leaning our way. We kind of like, oh God, the sky's falling and stuff like that. But we want to talk more about what's coming up in Kingman over the next year and stuff like that. And events coming up, something to look forward to instead of doom scrolling the news and stuff like that. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So what do you do for Kingman?
So my title is Tourism Services Manager. I run our tourism division for the City of Kingman. It's a division of the Economic Development Department. So we have a visitor center that's open 7 days a week in the Powerhouse. We welcome travelers from all over the country, all over the world, about 70 countries every year in the visitor center, 200,000 visitors last year. We also work with several partners, including the Historic Route 66 Association, the Mojave County Historical Society, Arizona Office of Tourism, and surrounding cities to promote Arizona, Kingman, Route 66 to the world.
And didn't you just get, how many million, just a couple months ago, you reached a milestone?
We did. We had our 3 millionth visitors walk through the doors. Officially in December. It actually happened sometime in November, according to our calculations. We don't know exactly who's the 3 millionth because there's 3 months in 1997 that I don't have numbers for. So I have to kind of guess those numbers based on the other years. And of course, we're clicking people as they come in with just like what you'd use in sports, a little clicker to count the number of people coming in. And sometimes we miss somebody, or maybe they accidentally click someone that's coming in for a meeting and not a visitor. So it's kind of, you don't know exactly, but we have a pretty good idea it happened in November 2024.
That is so cool on it. And you've been at this position for how long?
I started running our tourism efforts with Kingman in 2007. It was initially with the Chamber of Commerce. I started working with the Chamber on special events, membership services, ribbon cuttings, but because I'd done a lot of the event coordination with the tourism person that was there, I migrated into tourism. We ran it under the Chamber for a number of years before we separated off from the Chamber, made our own nonprofit, principally because the Chamber's focus is membership. Not all hotels and restaurants and places in Kingman members of the Chamber, but our funding came from those sales tax dollars that were spent at hotels. So we separated ourselves off so we could really focus on promoting Kingman as a whole. And then 8.5 years ago, the city decided, we need to be able to work together on projects more directly. And so we absorbed into the city as a division within the City of Kingman. So I've done the same job for almost 18 years. 3 different employers, but pretty much, the same role. And it's been a lot of fun. It's a fun job.
What led you to want to do something like this?
So when I was finishing up my bachelor's at ASU, I was doing an internship at the state capitol. I was an intern for the House, going through analyzing bills and presenting those bills in caucus and in meetings. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed kind of that public sector work, but it was about an 1.5-hour drive from where we lived. And since I grew up in Kingman, I really missed the small town environment. I missed being able to go home for lunch. I missed being able to get outdoors pretty easily. So when I learned about a position available at the Chamber of Commerce that would use a lot of the same skills that I used in the internship, I came back to Kingman. That was in 2005. Of course, I did other things with the Chamber and then eventually migrated into tourism because I really enjoyed the history that was celebrated with tourism. Kingman has a lot of really rich history. People think, Arizona doesn't have that much culture, but really we do. It's a lot of kind of that grit from the people that first moved here, 150 years ago. And there's just, Kingman has evolved as America's moved west, as people migrated differently over the years, first by wagon, then by train. Just the evolvement of this community has really been reflected in the evolvement of this country. And it's very interesting. People come to seek that out, to experience the authenticity of it, and I enjoy sharing that.
Well, I've noticed it just in the last 13 years that I've been here with how downtown has grown. Leaps and bounds. When I got here, it was like a ghost town down there.
Downtown got hit really hard in the crash of '08. A lot of the businesses that were downtown relied on tourists coming in, relied on people that were looking for, places to invest in. And when that crash hit, it kind of was a double whammy because Kingman was already in the early 2000s reeling from 9/11, and not just because of what it did, to the country and to the mood of the nation, but because of what it did to Hoover Dam. A lot of that traffic that was coming in, bringing travelers in motor coaches, they were coming across the dam. When 9/11 happened, they wouldn't allow trucks and wouldn't allow buses with travelers over the dam. They all had to find different routes, and Kingman got locked out of a lot of that tourism. So we were doing really well tourism-wise until 2001.
So 9/11, they had to direct them out through Searchlight and down the Bullhead.
Exactly. So instead of down 93, they had to go down 95, which then meant it didn't make sense going through Kingman anymore when you were traveling, to the between Phoenix and Las Vegas, a lot of the Grand Circle. So for motor coaches, we were, they might drive through, but we were no longer on that crucial timeline of when the place was to stop to eat or to stop and stay the night. We were kind of out of the way. So that really impacted our travel. And Kingman, we had some restaurants that had closed down. We had one, the Powerhouse, that closed down because of that. And then when the crash happened in '08, that really impacted a lot of the businesses. And of course, downtown, it's just a series of issues that had, brought to downtown to have all of the businesses move out, from I-40 coming in and bypassing Route 66 and bypassing downtown all the way to that time. So really, over many years, downtown had been losing businesses, losing occupancy, and really that didn't start back up until the Hoover Dam bypass bridge opened, and that was really where that opportunity started again. So you'll kind of see that start to come back in the early teens.
Okay, and that's when I got here. I got here in 2011, so that makes perfect sense. I didn't know. I didn't correlate the two things.
Yeah, and then we had a few businesses that started in downtown that really kind of initiated the resurgence, starting with the wine bar, starting with the coffee shop, Beale Street Brews, that used to be right next to the wine bar, and they'd have art that they started on First Fridays. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones that started the First Friday craze that really brought people down in the evenings. And then Floyd & Co. At the time it was Redneck's Southern Pit Barbecue. But these are the businesses that really started to bring downtown back to the map. Then Blackbridge Brewery. So now, of course, we've got 3 breweries downtown, many different restaurants, a lot of different shops. It is starting to really become something that people come to experience a small downtown America.
And First Friday is great down there. How much work is it to put into the First Friday in the organization?
So luckily, I don't have as much involvement in First Friday because it is a bit of work. It's largely the Chamber of Commerce, their staff and volunteers that put that on. Our streets department does do the road closures, which is a different department than ours. We help out with some of the planning. And we're there to help with, promotions and getting the word out, just being a partner. But that is really become one of the greater events in downtown Kingman is First Friday. We'll be starting up again in April this year. So April through October, the city's already committed that we're going to do street closures to let people come in downtown. We've got a cellular data analytical tool that we can identify about how many people are coming in, during different events. And on First Fridays, we're seeing 7,000 to 9,000 people come downtown for First Friday. So it's really impactful.
How much did COVID set us back, though? Because we had a good year there that everything was shut down.
So there were pluses and minuses with COVID. We did experience some reduced travel, particularly with international, right? But depending on the season, 30 to 60% of our travelers can be international, according to the guest book data that we collect in our visitor center. And so that went away, but our parks department was really smart in identifying a need for hosting Little League tournaments, softball tournaments, things that were not allowed to be put on in surrounding states. And we'd figured, if COVID is something that is transmitted indoors, then outdoors is a good space to be able to host events. They actually took the bleachers out. They didn't have bleachers in our parks. So people had to bring their own seats. So they spread out, they watched the games. People played games all year in Kingman. Literally, we had people playing softball and Little League in December and in January. So those really helped our hotels, helped our restaurants that were struggling to try to keep their doors open. Another thing that really helped is we're an interstate town. So we have all the truck traffic coming through. So we didn't have travelers staying. We still had a lot of truckers, and they started staying in a lot of the hotels and taking up those rooms. So we did see a drop, immediately that March, April. It was probably half at best of what our normal traffic would be, but it started picking up pretty quickly because of the efforts that our parks department was doing, and because of an interstate community, the logistics that just come through Kingman being on one of the major trucking routes in the country, that kept bringing people through town, and they were using our hotels and they were using our restaurants.
Yeah. So what do we have coming up this year so far?
So this year, just like last year, as I said, we have our First Friday starting back up in April. We'll have our Route 66 fun run in May. And for those that don't know, the Route 66 fun run, and it's not a race, it's a car rally that happens over 3 days in 3 different communities in Arizona. It is on the longest remaining stretch of historic Route 66. It was first held in 1988 to commemorate the ribbon cutting of our Governor Rose Moffett establishing Arizona as a historic highway in Arizona. We were the first state to do that. This is the first celebration of Route 66 in the entire world. So it's something that we really hold on to because Arizona is where that initiative started. Seligman's known as the birthplace of historic Route 66 because it really is where, that was started. And then as we get into the summer, a lot of it's just a lot of travel coming in. I know there's some other events that are going to be coming in throughout the community. We're really looking forward to what downtown brings with the new renovation being open all summer long and kind of seeing what that impact is. And it's just going to be a really busy year. Next year is going to be even busier because we have the centennial of Route 66 happening in 2026 and the U.S. 250th as well.
Oh, I didn't even realize that was coming up.
Yep. Both of those will be the same year. So it's going to be, there's going to be a lot going on in 2026.
You're going to be a busy guy next year.
Yes.
We've got our friend down the street. He lives actually 3 doors down. He owns a little business on the corner across from the railroad. We'll just leave it at that. What does, the involvement in him. Now, I know some businesses, I'll be politically correct, feel like they're left out of this process of being where the 66 Festival is held, where it's held, a few miles up the street in the park rather than downtown. What is the reason for holding it out there rather than down in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a legitimate question. And we've got several reasons that we host it where we host it. One, it's got to be on Route 66. It's not the off Route 66 festival. So it's not something we can host up on Beale Street, or somewhere downtown that's not on Route 66. Route 66 in the downtown area has some key challenges with the railroad right next to the road, with the dust on those sections of the road that run along the tracks. When the wind whips up, we have had several events downtown, like the Fun Run, where we've had vendors that were near that space that when the dust comes up, it just makes it really hard to keep their product clean, make it a good environment. And we don't have, there's some real traffic logistic issues when we close down the street. So if we wanted to host it, we've looked at several different configurations between Locomotive Park, the Powerhouse, and going down the street. When we start incorporating the Powerhouse space into it in Locomotive Park, then you're really diverting traffic down Beale Street and then down those other little streets. When we host the Fun Run for one day, that's pretty doable. But when you want to have the streets closed down for 2 days in order to put the festival on, it makes it a bigger challenge. And that space is actually smaller than the current space we're using. So the park that we're using now, it's grass. We don't have the dust to worry about. We've got trees. It's a lot cooler. And we've got about 8 acres. With the different activities that we bring in, like the zip line, we need 240 feet of straight runway in order to run that. We could do that out in the street. It'd be kind of hot, or we do it in the grass. But to do it in the grass, we need a space big enough to do that. There's no area downtown that we can do that. And the reason that we have the different activities that we have, the Euro Bungee, the zip line, it's all an homage to Santa Monica Pier and kind of the carnival atmosphere that you have, the fair that they've got out there. So all the different things that we do with the festival are really to celebrate aspects of Route 66, from the music, the car shows, the camping shows, and even pinup contests, but even, those activities that kids come enjoy to do.
Right, so it's not the Kingman Festival, it's the Route 66
It's the Route 66 Festival.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's where someone might be mistaken in what they believe it should be.
So, that park gives us 8 acres, enough room to put on a pretty good size event with grass, and then 5 additional acres of parking. And then we can still have our car show directly on Route 66. If we tried to do the event on 66 downtown, because both sides of the street are either covered by tracks or buildings, we'd have to throw the event on the road, which means that now if we want to have a car show and we want to have an event, instead of it being condensed into this really walkable space, we're going to make it a really long, thin event. And then we're going to have a challenge having the beer garden and the other things that people enjoy. The nice thing about the park where we're at is we can close it off pretty easily. And then your whole event is a beer garden. People can get food, they can get drink, and they can go and enjoy, the entire event. So it's really about the amenities of the space is why we chose that location.
Right. And to be honest, like any downtown vendor that wanted to rent a space could sell their product there and promote their business at that location.
Absolutely. And if you think about it also, Michael, if we host all of our events downtown, then how are any of the events special? So we have the Fun Run downtown. We have our First Fridays downtown. We have our Street of Lights downtown. If we bring all of our events into the same venue, then it becomes less interesting and people get more disengaged. And I'll use as an example, before COVID, we had done a Andy Divine Days Festival downtown. So it was very similar to the Route 66 Festival with the different components. We had vendors, we had some of the rides, we'd sprinkle them around. They were up on Beale Street. And then we started having downtown First Fridays happening, and both of them were happening. And all of a sudden you saw a little bit less people going to both events because they were so similar. So if you have different events, and chilling on Beale, that's another one that takes place downtown too. You have too many events going on one venue, then people start to lose interest in that venue. So it's really good to have different spaces utilized so that people have a variety.
That's an aspect I've never even really thought of. So, you're based out of the Powerhouse.
Mm-hmm.
How many different countries visit?
About 70 countries every year. So we have a guest book that we keep out at the front of the visitor center, and it says in several different languages. Sign in. Let us know your city and your purpose of travel. And with that, we also have little check marks that they can check off. The reason I'm coming is Kingman, museums and historic sites, Route 66, Las Vegas. And believe it or not, so last year, we had 200,000 people come in. We had like 12,000 people sign that guest book. And of course, each person that signs it's got a party traveling with them. So about 2.4, 2.5 travelers on average, because they say how many people are in their party. So we have a pretty good number of the people that are coming in, signing in. That tell us where they're coming from. So from that, we can get a lot of really good data about what different travelers from different areas of the globe are doing when they're coming into Kingman, or what their interests are that help us to market and promote the community based on where people are coming from.
And that's about how many countries have listened to this podcast. Okay, so promotion here. Robert here wrote the book Weird Kingman, and a lot of paranormal stuff of her experiences. We wanted to address the myth because we were trying to figure it out. We thought the alleged tunnels, or the myth of the tunnels, had gone all the way out to the Powerhouse. And we were discussing before we turned this stuff on that that's not true.
Right. So, of course, the Powerhouse sat empty for 60 years. It was built between 1907 and 1909, and produced power for the community as well as area mines. When Hoover Dam came online in 1938, it pretty much was no longer useful because the diesel generated power is a lot more expensive than the hydro produced power. So it sat empty for about 60 years until a group started doing renovations to make it into what it is today. The individual that was in charge of that is Toby Orr. He's still, contractor in Kingman. I've talked with him about the renovation of the Powerhouse and that project, and asked about the tunnels. And he said, the tunnels, if they exist, they don't come to the Powerhouse. There were no tunnels. They had to tear that place inside out in order to meet the federal grant requirements and make it into a space that they could utilize for what we use it for today. And there were no tunnels. Now, there were some kind of like steam tracks, spaces for them to pull airflow in. But these would have been like crawl spaces at best, maybe 18 inches tall, 24 inches wide, that had extended like out to the railroad tracks and probably other areas, because there were other off buildings on site. There were other tracks on site. There was a track that actually went between where the Powerhouse and Route 66 is today for offloading fuel. So there was a lot of different infrastructure that tied into. And I don't know, as you said, tunnels are a myth. We don't know what aspects of them are true and what aspects are not exactly. It's possible that could have pulled into that area because at the time they could have had steam going to different businesses to warm them up in the winter. There was a laundry that was right behind the Powerhouse, about where Bangkok Thai is right now, that probably got its steam from the Powerhouse. It makes a lot of sense. So there could have been smaller spaces for running utilities or steam between the Powerhouse and other spaces, but certainly not what I'd call a tunnel.
Okay. And what's going on with the renovations of the Hotel Beale? What are they looking to do with that?
So the Hotel Beale, is a fascinating space. It's one of the few like it in Arizona, being right off the tracks. A lot of the travelers coming through would have stayed at the Beale Hotel. Kind of even more fascinating. So, early on when people were traveling, going across the country, train would have been the big route, right? But really, even before automobiles, and there was more cars being used all the time, but the big new way of getting across the country, getting mail across country, getting people across country, getting Hollywood stars across the country was by flight. So Charles Lindbergh founded Arizona's first commercial airport right here in Kingman in 1929. He stayed at the Beale Hotel. A lot of people that would have used that service stayed at the Beale Hotel because if you think about it, back in that time, you had runways, but they weren't lit. So they would fly by day, rail by night. And Kingman became a really good spot to transition between flight and rail. So the Beale just has so much really fascinating history. But it's been really in disuse for 30 plus years. The bones are good. There's a lot of probably asbestos and other contaminants that need to be remedied. There's a lot of leaks, that should be relatively simple or simpler than a wooden structure because so much of it is poured concrete. But there's a lot of work that would need to be done to renovate it. So right now, the current effort that's taking place is we had members of the Arizona Historic SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, come in and review the space with us so that they can kind of have an idea of what sort of challenges we're going through, and then they'll give us some feedback on different avenues that we have available to us going into the future with renovating it. We also worked with the Kingman Main Street. They applied for a grant with the Arizona Route 66 Association to have a facade improvement study done on the front of the building. Main Street's main focus is going to be the experience out of the street. So they're just trying to, help figure out how to make the facade look more like it did when it was a functioning building. So that's one step, and that's one thing that's being worked on now. But there's a lot of work that's going to need to go into the Beale to bring that back to something that's usable today.
I've always just wanted to go in there and explore.
It is a very cool place to explore. Yeah. I've been there a few times, touring with the SHPO office, touring with some city representatives. My first time I went through there was with a council member who invited me in. She was touring through with a family back in 2008. It's so massive. You have 3 different floors to get up into. You have the basement down below, so I guess you could say 4 floors. It going from the street to the alley, it's just amazing how far back that goes, and there's so many different spaces. It is a really cool space. I think one of the SHPO representatives we had said that was probably the coolest place that she had been through in the state of Arizona.
That's cool. And then I guess we'll wrap it up with how involved are you with Beale Street Theater and that renovation?
Oh, yes. So Beale Street Theater, the city hasn't been hugely involved. They're going to be looking for some assistance with some components. We have our Economic Development Advisory Commission meeting on Tuesday next week. They're going to be requesting some help with funding to get a LED board that they can use to announce, future upcoming shows. So we're going to try and help with that. We helped with some of the fundraising when they do the Ghost Walk downtown. That's all fundraising for the Beale. We did one in the Powerhouse a couple times, which also helped to raise funds. So we kind of ran fundraisers for the Beale in there. But it's really, we're excited to see it open up and help promote the shows and the activities they have going on, because that's going to bring so much life to downtown Kingman at nighttime. Really excited about it. Just yesterday, we had a open house there in the theater. to collect input from people on what sort of art they'd like to see in Kingman, in our roadways and our parks. And with that, people could go and take a tour of the theater and see what that process is looking like. And it's just, it's really coming along. They've got the ducting in now. Had to get special ducting because when you're in a theater environment, you don't want to hear that system come on and off when it starts blowing air. So it's got to have certain insulation in it, in order to run the air and you don't hear it and it doesn't impact your experience. Got to see the blueprints of the seats. It's really kind of interesting because when they put the seats in, there's some seats that are going to be 19 inches wide, some seats that are 22 inches wide, and they're not in certain areas. It's just how they fit it in order to fit that space because, that theater's an old theater. Things were built differently back then, so they kind of have to re-put everything in.
What's the capacity going to be?
So I think the seats that are bolted down is going to be around 300. But they've got another 25, 30 feet in front of the seats between that and the stage that's kind of, you can use for different things. So you can add additional seating. And I don't remember if maybe 360 with that space, or you could leave it for putting an orchestra pit, or you can have it just for standing, room at a concert. 300 to 360, something like that.
Right, because I have some connections with some comedians. I was trying to think about, who would I put them in touch with in order to, say, once this opens up, to book there? Yeah,
Christina Mickelson is the director of the theater. It's all under her. She'd be the one that would be making the bookings until they get a full-time person on board that can manage those, which they're going to need to do when they get things off the ground.
And then, do you know the time frame on when that would be up and going?
They are hoping by this summer they can start doing some basic shows. Comedy routines, that sort of thing. It'll be a little bit more time before they have the full infrastructure in for lighting and sound. But if they can get started with some things, that helps them to raise the funds to get the rest of it in. We are working with a documentary filmmaker on having a Route 66 Centennial documentary held at the theater in July of 2026. So I would imagine most everything would be fleshed out by then.
Oh, that's very cool. Very cool. Like you went to see Star Wars there, didn't you, originally?
I'm so happy that theater's coming back. When I was a little kid, I went and saw the original Star Wars 23 times and stood in the line all the way to where the old Central commercial was to go through and sit in there and watch movies.
Wow.
It was amazing.
My parents moved here in the early 70s, and so before I was born, they saw one of the Star Wars ones in that theater when it was. And I know they've talked about that too. So
yeah, it's so cool. Looking forward.
I'd love to see the Beale come back, the Hotel Beale, where my great grandfather had his bar, the sump in the basement. But yeah, my family's been here for more than 100 years now.
Wow.
So.
I'd also like to see the Brunswick come back. So my wife and I, we actually had our wedding reception in where Garibaldi's is now. Mm-hmm. But that place has always been really special, and it's pretty tore up now. It doesn't have the same, asbestos and contamination issues as the Beale, but it would need a lot of work. Both those spaces are really special to Kingman.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
It's been informative, and we'll have you on again. We need to get Jim Hinckley to come back and talk about some of this stuff again.
Oh yeah,
we want to get more of the paranormal part of Kingman, get to those stories.
Get Jim down there in the basement of the Beale.
Yeah, that's what we need. We need Jim to give us a tour down there. All right, so on that, again, hey, thank you for filling in for Snow, who's still missing in action. But
that's right.
Yeah. Oh, and there she is. As we wrap that up, you're late.
I know, but I feel that it adds to our show. Everybody who listens knows I'm a hot mess.
To say goodbye to everybody.
Oh,
we were just wrapping this up.
Hi, guys.
All right, Snow. We're going to have to talk about your punctuality on the podcast.
No, I'm fired, right?
No. I can afford to hire anyone else. All right, on that note, we'll wrap this up, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, y'all.
Or at least I'll see you. I don't know about Snow.
I'll be here. I'm only allowed like one tardy, right?
All right. See you later.